Anthony Albanese's upcoming trip to Beijing has been potentially disrupted by security advice that he should avoid travelling in his RAAF jet because its systems could be hacked by Chinese spies. Someone who knows all about this is the Shadow Home Affairs and Cybersecurity Minister, James Paterson. James, how timely to have you on this morning. So is the threat of this the PM's jet being hacked? Is that a serious one?
Good morning, Peter. I should say at the outset, I haven't been briefed on this. If I had been, of course, I couldn't publicly speculate, but I don't want to speculate too much. What I would say is that this really does highlight the ongoing complexities of the bilateral relationship between Australia and China, despite the Albanese government's efforts to stabilise the relationship, which we've provided bipartisan support for, and despite the Chinese government putting on ice for now some of the wolf warrior diplomacy, there are still some very real challenges in this relationship that I think will persist for some time, and things like this are perfect evidence of those complications. It's not a straightforward, normal bilateral relationship. It is an unusual one and has to be managed very carefully.
So could, more broadly, could a bad actor disrupt a plane, hack a plane?
There's an awful lot of things you can do to the very sensitive electronics on those planes, the sensitive capabilities that those planes have. I think the broader context here is important. ASIO assesses that espionage and foreign interference is our number one security challenge. And it is the Chinese government which is the number one source of those threats. The Chinese government is also the number one source of the state-backed cybersecurity threats facing our country. So if you think about that, and if you think about the sensitivity of the things that might be on a Prime Minister's plane that's operated by the Defence Force for the Prime Minister, you can understand why leaving it on the tarmac overnight in Beijing does involve some risks.
So maybe it's just best to fly Air China because, Chinese hackers aren't going to hack one of their own planes.
Well, truthfully, that would be an unfortunate situation if the Australian government can't safely operate one of our own planes for the Prime Minister and his entourage to go on an important bilateral visit. We must be able to find appropriate mitigations to make sure that the Prime Minister can do that. And frankly, we should have some ground rules and some expectations of our partners about things that they will and won't do to our sensitive capabilities if the Prime Minister is there as part of a goodwill gesture, frankly, of a relationship that's been under real strain because of the actions that the Chinese government took against Australia, including their unjustified trade sanctions and their ongoing arbitrary detention of 2 Australian citizens who we believe should be released.
Okay, yeah. So just finally, to be clear here, you're still of the view that the Prime Minister should go to Beijing?
The Prime Minister has to weigh up very carefully the benefits and costs of doing so. The most important thing I would say is that it's not a trip on which any concessions should be made for the Australian side because it was not the Australian side that contributed to the deterioration of the relationship. And I really hope that from the trip, if it does indeed proceed, that it results in the freedom of Cheng Lei and Yang Hengjun because they should not be detained. There is no evidence that they are guilty of what they have been accused of, and they have been mistreated and detained for far too long. I also hope that the remaining trade sanctions against Australian industry is lifted.
Okay, moving on to Clare ONeal. She's accused Peter Dutton of starving the immigration system of resources and allowing criminal syndicates of exploiting weaknesses. She is your opponent at the moment, James, so what's your response to that?
Well, this was a transparently political exercise from the Minister for Home Affairs. She said that the report that she received from Christine Nixon 7 months ago was urgent. If that was really true, and if the situation was as dire as she thinks it is, then the response from the government should have come a long time ago, and it should have been much more dramatic and radical than what it is. Really, this is some very minor tinkering and minor changes. It's not a substantive change to our immigration system or the way in which we administer visas. This is clearly an effort on behalf of the Minister to try and damage the legacy of the previous government, and including very particularly to target Peter Dutton. It's not clear what they've spent the last 7 months doing other than preparing social media tiles to be released after the Minister's press conference attacking Peter Dutton. That was very clearly what they spent their time and effort in, and I think that's very revealing that this was political from the outset. Okay,
but if gangs and crooks were allowed to stay here during Peter Dutton's time when he was in government, and yours for that matter too, isn't he or your government at fault for that?
I'm very happy to compare our record on border protection and national security with the Labor Party's any day of the week. Let's remember when they were last in office, they presided over a human misery on a massive scale. People dying at sea, thousands of people illegally coming to Australia. We fixed that. We turned that around. We secured our border. And under Peter Dutton's leadership as Minister for Immigration and then Minister for Home Affairs, he cancelled a record number of visas on character grounds, something that this government has not done. In fact, the cancellation of visas on character grounds has dropped dramatically on Clare ONeal's watch. So if she's really protecting Australia, if it's really as dire it is, why is she not cancelling visas on character grounds at anywhere near the numbers that the previous government was doing?
Okay, well, just finally, and some of those proposed changes you just referred to a short time ago, but create a compliance division, the $50 million investment in the visa system. I mean, do you support those?
Well, we'll look at the detail, but actually what that describes sounds to me like things that are already in place. Of course, there's already compliance measures and checks in place, and if they need to be tweaked to improve the system, we'll be sensible and bipartisan about this because
more
we
staff
do
needed,
care
compliance staff.
about protecting Australians. Well, perhaps there is a case for that, although from what we can see, really most of the announcements actually came in the budget and very little new has been announced yesterday.
James Paterson, we're out of time, but appreciate your time as always.